Every year at this time of year, the top free agents inevitably start re-signing with their own teams. But that doesn't mean the Chicago Bears can't still find quality players at positions of need a little bit lower down the free agent wish list.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we dig into the Bears' upcoming free agent targets with an understanding that, hey, wait a minute, many of the top guys on the list are either going to get franchise tagged within the next week or even before the start of free agency. If they're not franchise tagged, they could still and are likely to still re-sign with their own team and not ultimately end up hitting the market. It doesn't mean no one good is going to hit the market, but a lot of the top names you might be circling and thinking about spending all the Bears cap space on right now won't actually be available for the Bears to spend their cap space on, but we can look at some of the other options at some of the Bears' biggest positions of need to kind of go, okay, what's our consolation prize if Brian Burns, the Carolina Panthers, doesn't end up hitting the free agent market, or if, the Broncos center Lloyd Cushenberry, any of these kind of bigger name targets that we might be looking at might not end up actually having a chance to re-sign or to sign them if you're the Bears, but there's still some quality players at all of the Bears' biggest positions of need. This exact premise is why Ryan Poles traded for Montez Sweat last season during the season. And honestly, it's why Ryan Poles traded for Chase Claypool the season before, because he looked ahead to free agency in both cases with Montez Sweat and looked at it and go, listen, really good, let me rephrase that, great edge rushers don't hit free agency, at least not great young edge rushers. Occasionally you get Von Miller in his 30s, hits the market and signs a huge deal with the Buffalo Bills, but these are more like later career type of free agents, not so much like young ascending cornerstone type edge rushers don't hit the free agent market. So Ryan Poles had to give up a second round pick to have the chance to sign Montez Sweat to a contract extension, knowing that he wasn't going to hit the market. He was either going to be traded to somebody or the Commanders would re-sign him. This is not how teams operate with young quality talent. And so when you look at the group of upcoming free agent edge rushers this season, a couple of the guys at the top of the list are not going to hit free agency in one form or another. I would be surprised if Josh Allen from the Jacksonville Jaguars actually hits the open market and is available to sign to every team. Now, whether Jacksonville franchise tags him or signs him to a contract extension, we'll see, but it's not the kind of situation where teams are just going to let that kind of talent walk out the door. Think about it with Jalen Johnson and the Chicago Bears. Perhaps the top cornerback set to hit free agency right now. And you probably have fans of other teams around the NFL going, oh man, our team has salary cap space and we could sign Jalen Johnson. And we're all sitting here saying, yeah, but the Bears are not going to let him just walk. At the very least, you tag and trade him. And that could be the case for Josh Allen from the Jaguars, for Brian Burns from the Carolina Panthers, etc. But at a minimum, they're going to be retained by the team under contract, and then whether they get dished or whether they get dealt or acquired from there is a separate conversation. But it's not going to be the Jaguars just say, we don't want anything for Josh Allen, we'll take the compensatory pick. That's not going to happen. I mean, even Danielle Hunter from the Minnesota Vikings is no guarantee to be hitting the open market here. The Vikings are certainly in salary cap trouble right now and are working to navigate that. They can't afford Danielle Hunter and Kirk Cousins, so they kind of have to decide where they're going to go quarterback-wise. It's possible they do let Danielle Hunter hit the open market, but even compared to a Montez Sweat, right? Like Danielle Hunter has been a very productive pass rusher, but he's not as good of a run defender all around, and he's getting some tread on the tires, or some wear on the tires. He's not old yet, but he's played 6,000 snaps across his NFL career, and I think he turns 29 or 30 during this upcoming season. Like, he's not washed by any means. He turns 30 during this upcoming season, so he's not old, right? But this is kind of the next handful of seasons are his last hurrah. Whereas like the truly like young ascending players like a Josh Allen or a Brian Burns, like they've got another 5+ years left in their NFL career and really like still entering their prime. Those are not the kind of players that are going to hit free agency. So you got to hope for a guy like maybe Danielle Hunter. He could be the top of what this free agent class ultimately ends up looking like. Or, I mean, Chase Young is kind of in this borderline range as he's young like that, but he doesn't have the same level of consistent production across the board like a Danielle Hunter. But then it's guys like Jonathan Greenard from the Texans, who also might re-sign with Houston and not hit free agency. Bryce Huff from the Jets has good production, but he's been more of a rotational guy and hasn't necessarily looked like a guy who you can trust as an every down all the time guy, at least not proven. Or you've got like an older Leonard Floyd, or I guess from the Patriots, Josh Uche from Michigan is kind of the same boat as Bryce Huff, where rotational guys, like that's more where we have to set our expectations when it comes to free agents. Same kind of thing goes for the interior class. If we're talking about pass rushers in general, the great ones don't hit free agency. Like, it's really hard to envision the Chiefs just saying, Chris Jones, we'll let him go for nothing. They're either going to re-sign him or franchise tag him and then try and trade him, or franchise tag him and try and work out a deal. But I'm not expecting Chris Jones to just hit the open market in the same way that some of these other, quote unquote, lesser free agents by comparison ultimately end up hitting the market. Jones is in a similar boat for Danielle Hunter, where it's like, okay, 29 turns 30 in July. So he's not a young man anymore, but still has some good years left in him, but a lot of wear and tear. And there's some questions about, his effort and his participation over the course of this past season. But that doesn't mean guys, farther down the free agent wish list. Because again, I think like Justin Madubuike from the Ravens might not be franchise tag, but a guy who's most likely to re-sign. Christian Wilkins from the Miami Dolphins. Like, these are not guys that we should expect to hit free agency. Leonard Williams is where the conversation starts because, he signed the contract and ended up kind of bouncing around a little bit. I mean, he may end up back with the New York Giants when it's all said and done, but we'll see how that kind of pans out. But he could potentially hit the market, but he's been kind of bouncing around a little bit in his career. But then it's like, it's the Grover Stewarts of the world, or Daquan Jones, or, Quentin Jeffersons, where, okay, these are not 10-sack guys every year. Or it's the older guys like Fletcher Cox, who we know has been great, but, he's 33. Like, you're at the end of your career type of free agents. But the really good but also still young players don't tend to hit free agency. There's exceptions every once in a while, but the really great young players typically don't. So we can't count on the Jalen Johnsons of other positions ultimately having a shot for the Bears to sign them in free agency. But that doesn't mean that Bears can't still get really good players at those spots and feel like, okay, they're filling some of these holes with quality free agents, even if they're not like, elite type of free agents. The other nice thing here is that some of the Bears' bigger needs fall at positions that don't tend to have as many premium free agents anyway, because they're not positions that are valued as highly financially by the NFL as a spot like edge rusher or any kind of pass rusher on the defensive line. So we'll go and take a look at like why this phenomenon of great players not really hitting free agency, the Bears are a little bit more insulated from that at safety and at center in particular, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. BetterHelp is here to provide you online therapy that's suited right to your schedule. I can't recommend doing online therapy enough because it's super, super helpful. It's a really important part of my own mental health regimen. I always like to say I go to the gym because I want my body to be better, and I go to mental health. I go to therapy because I want my mental health to be better. Not because my brain is broken. I don't go to the gym because my body's broken, but because I want to be at my absolute best. And so if you've been thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and flexible. All you do, you fill out a brief questionnaire, and then you get matched with a licensed therapist. And if that therapist just doesn't quite fit for whatever reason, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So while the best of the best edge rushers and interior pass rushers not very likely to hit the free agent market, again, why Ryan Poles got ahead of things by trading for Montez Sweat and making sure he could address that in some way, shape, or form, the concern is less so for the Bears at two of their other big positions of need, free safety and center. These are both spots that NFL teams have shown over the years, for whatever reason, they don't value as highly. Doesn't mean there aren't still good players at those positions that do ultimately get paid a decent amount of money, but generally you're not seeing humongous safety contracts, in free agency. There are certainly exceptions there, but it's not something that teams go out and really make a priority and spend a lot of money on. A lot of times really good safeties will end up kind of slipping through the cracks and ultimately kind of still being available on the cheap. Like, of course, we see exceptions to this, like Jesse Bates. Was that last offseason? Signs with the Falcons on a big contract from the Cincinnati Bengals and played really well for them. And he's made like the fourth highest safety in pro football. Like, there are always players like that. So there's no guarantee that when you look at this safety class that none of the good players are going to get through. But like Antoine Winfield Jr. from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, for example, not a guy I'm expecting to hit free agency. Like, a franchise tag certainly seems very likely for him. He's a versatile young player who's really got a lot of upside. But like, that might be it for safeties that are going to be kept from hitting the open market. I mean, maybe the Patriots re-sign Kyle Duggar or use a franchise tag on him, but like, I don't know that he's like this elite safety that you got to get and like, oh man, Kyle Duggar's off the market, you can't go get him. Like, there's other options there. It's not stellar options because, again, it's not a position that's like super high valued in that regard, but the Bears should be fine. Like, even if Winfield doesn't hit the market, you're not hurting too bad. Cameron Curl from Washington. You've got, I mentioned before on this podcast, Julian Blackman from the Indianapolis Colts certainly has connections there. Xavier McKinney from the New York Giants. Geno Stone from the Ravens, although he could end up re-signing with his team or following Mike McDaniel to the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, not all these guys are going to be available to the Bears, but safety is one of those spots where there's a lot of guys that are going to hit free agency, and every year really good ones end up lasting like deep into free agency. We saw this years ago with the Bears and signing Clinton Dix late in free agency on a 1-year deal. And then a couple years later, Tashawn Gibson is with a P, ends up signing with the Bears late in free agency on kind of a 1-year deal. Like, these guys end up being not enough openings for safeties and not any teams willing to pay a lot of money for these safeties. And so you can find a decent veteran later on in this process, and I imagine that may be how the Bears go about this. Somebody like Darnell Savage from the Green Bay Packers could be one of these guys where, I think he's a quality player. He's not like a Pro Bowl all the time kind of guy, but like, he's a starting safety in the NFL, and the younger guys that we've already kind of mentioned may end up being higher priority, and then maybe Savage ends up kind of slipping for a little while, or C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I mean, even Tashawn Gibson is going to hit free agency again, but he's 33. I don't think we're going to see a reunion there exactly, but that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. There will be safeties there for the Chicago Bears, even if maybe one or two at the top end up re-signing with their own team. Same thing at center, where you got kind of a weird market there with Connor Williams from the Miami Dolphins, who's injured. Maybe won't be ready for week 1, TBD, so that may affect his free agency in a weird way, or maybe the Dolphins just say, hey, we're going to re-sign you and be patient with you, or franchise tag him if they want, but I don't think they'll tag him. Lloyd Cushenberry from the Broncos is kind of the other, big name at center that we've seen. I think Brad Biggs and some others have floated out there as a potential possible target for the Bears. But, the Denver Broncos just going to let a good young center go without re-signing him? I mean, all these teams have first dibs on all of these free agents between now and the start of free agency. Just like the Bears are probably going to re-sign at least a couple of their own free agents. We talked about that a couple weeks ago on the podcast. What's Denver's incentive to say, we don't want to pay Cushenberry, but every other team would? Like, any player that hits free agency, whether it's at center, free safety, or pass rusher, you have to ask yourself, why did this player hit free agency? Why didn't these teams re-sign that player? Like, if he's such a good young player, why didn't the team re-sign him? Whether it's Cushenberry at center, or if it's the Vikings with Danielle Hunter, or if it's an interior pass rusher on another team. Like, in some cases, you might look at the Vikings and say, well, they're short on cap space. That's why they didn't re-sign Danielle Hunter. But if it's a team like Denver, why didn't they re-sign Cushenberry if they let Cushenberry hit the market? Or any of these kind of teams, when it's really, truly like a quality young player that you feel like, why? You always got to kind of ask yourself that question because, again, great players don't often hit free agency. Everyone that hits free agency has some kind of reason that their own team didn't want to re-sign them. But even so, if Cushenberry comes off the market, if Connor Williams comes off the market, like you've still got, I like Tyler Biadasz from the Dallas Cowboys quite a bit. Maybe I'm a little bit biased there, but I think he's a quality center that would fit this scheme very well. The Steelers just released Mason Cole, a veteran center of theirs who's got some interior offensive line versatility. We've also talked before about the Seattle Seahawks center, Evan Brown, could be a real option for them as well. So it feels like one way or another, there's 8, 9 starting caliber centers that are set to hit free agency. And even if one or two of those guys ends up re-signing with their own team for whatever reason, then you're still going to have 5 or 6 potentially varying degrees of reliable starting centers hitting free agency where you can get a veteran in the middle of your Chicago Bears offensive line to help presumably your rookie quarterback behind him and just kind of stabilize that group as opposed to maybe pairing rookie and rookie there. And same thing on defense, right? A veteran free safety to lead the younger players you've got at cornerback and safety as opposed to plugging in a rookie along with a bunch of second and third year players all under the age of 25 and then also Jalen Johnson. We'll see how the Bears want to approach it, but those positions are so much cheaper than other positions in free agency that I feel like I'd rather spend the money on a center who's only going to cost me, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10 million a year, and a safety who's going to cost me 7, 8, 9, 10 million a year versus paying 25 for an edge rusher. Or you could pay 25 for the edge rusher and draft a center and a safety, but if the center and safety are already cheaper free agent positions, and your rookies are going to cost the same no matter what position, ideally you draft the more expensive positions, especially earlier in the draft, wide receiver, edge rusher, etc., and you can use free agency to get the cheaper positions because they're just not going to cost you that much, and you're not really saving as much by going with a rookie there compared to how much you'd be saving by going with a rookie at the edge rusher spot or even at wide receiver. Like that's why we talk about the 9th overall pick being that more of a priority position there as opposed to a position that might cost you more to fill in free agency. That's what makes wide receiver so interesting for the Bears. And this is another spot where the top wide receivers are, we already see T. Higgins has been franchise tagged, probably because they might want to trade him. But regardless, he's not hitting the market. And a couple of these other top free agents aren't going to hit the market either. But maybe the Bears don't need a top free agent at wide receiver. I still think, though, wide receiver free agency tends to be buyer beware, especially the bigger contracts for wide receivers in free agency don't have a great track record. Well, we'll show you what I mean and kind of illustrate the point with some examples next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So just because the football season's over doesn't mean the football betting is over at FanDuel. You can bet on this upcoming NFL draft, who's going to be drafted where, what positions are going to go with which picks. You can bet on next year's season for MVP and Super Bowl odds and so much more, plus all of your favorite other sports. Basketball, soccer, hockey, tennis, college sports, you name it, they've got it all at FanDuel, all on their app that's super easy to use. It's convenient, quick, download it right on your phone. So to get your $150 in bonus bets, all you got to do is place any winning $5 bet. You're going to get $150 added to your account. To get it for yourself, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA and NFL. The Chicago Bears should address wide receiver in free agency this year in some capacity. But I'm not sure that this is the time, or maybe if there's ever a great time, to go big contract for a big name wide receiver. It historically hasn't been a consistent plan for addressing the wide receiver position effectively for teams because much like edge rusher, the good, consistent wide receivers don't often hit free agency. Sometimes you can get a good deal on an older player who's still got some tread on the tires and can come to your team for a year or two. But when you see big contracts handed out to free agent wide receivers, it doesn't have a strong track record of working. So, when I think about T. Higgins is already off the market, Michael Pittman from the Colts, I really don't expect him to hit free agency. The Colts will either tag him and keep him, or tag him and try and trade him, or just sign him to an extension. Mike Evans from the Buccaneers is where the question marks start for me. Like, he's 30, almost 31, but he's a lifelong Buccaneer. I know that ownership in Tampa Bay loves Mike Evans and really doesn't want to see Mike Evans go for any reason. We'll see if they finally reach the point where they say, all right, we have to because we just can't keep bringing him back. But like, as they've really valued that 1,000-yard season streak. He's had 1,000 yards every year of his whole career, and they've wanted him to keep doing that. He's a Pro Bowler this year. Like, I know ownership in Tampa does not want Mike Evans to leave the door. We'll see. He might. That's not me saying he's not going to hit free agency, but you never know. But even if he does, the reason why he does is because he's 31, right? This is not a 25-year-old 1,000-yard receiver hitting the open market. He's got a couple seasons of high quality left in him, and then we'll see. And so that's where you really can't expect greatness all the time from free agency. Like, Marquise Brown has already kind of traveled teams before, right? He went from the Ravens where they drafted him, they traded him to the Cardinals, right? Like, he's got warts or flaws, or just he's not the surefire thing at receiver. Certainly Calvin Ridley, as we start to go down like the list, we look at guys who have 1,000-yard potential or 1,000-yard production or close to that in their career. Like, all these guys have flaws once you get past the top couple of receivers. And even bigger than that, like, just in general, there's a longer track record here when it comes to the wide receiver position. I saw there was a tweet from Ian Hartitz, who works for Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. He's on the Fantasy Life podcast. He does great work. You can follow him at iHartitz on Twitter. It's IHARTITZ. He's a great follow, but he tweeted out a list of wide receiver contracts in the last like 6 or 7 free agencies of every wide receiver that got more than $30 million total in their contract. And it's not a great list. This past free agency, it was Jacoby Myers to the Raiders and Alan Lazard to the Jets. Not exactly game-changing, huge acquisitions for them. Like, not terrible, but okay. Like, these are not receivers that are, like, revolutionizing your offense, right? The year before that, Marquez Valdez-Scantling to the Chiefs, Russell Gage to the Buccaneers, Allen Robinson to the Rams, and then the big one was Christian Kirk to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Kirk has been pretty good for them, but the moment he signed that contract, everyone thought Christian Kirk was overpaid there. He got $18 million a year for a guy who maybe hadn't been as productive as an $18 million a year contract. He's been fine for them, but they certainly had to pay a premium for it. But Allen Robinson, a huge bust with the Rams. Russell Gage with the Bucks. I don't know that he's moving the needle a ton. Marquez Valdez-Scantling for the Chiefs, really not making, And you can go back year after year through this list. Kenny Golladay to the Giants was a big signing that obviously busted pretty bad. Corey Davis for the Jets never really quite panned out. Curtis Samuel for Washington was okay for them. Like, some of these guys have been okay for these teams, but for the most part, free agent that signs a big contract with a team at wide receiver specifically doesn't really end up being a huge addition for them. It ends up being somewhere between a complete bust and a slight disappointment. There are exceptions to all these rules, but like, I don't see free agency as the place to go get a big name wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. This is why you traded for DJ Moore. Like, this was Ryan Poles' approach at both of these positions. It's like, okay, I know either good players aren't going to hit free agency, or that the ones that do hit free agency aren't going to be the kind of game changers I need for my team. So I got to go trade for DJ Moore because he's not going to hit free agency. I got to go trade for Montez Sweat because he's not going to hit free agency. Obviously, he thought Chase Claypool was the solution to avoiding the wide receiver free agent class. And again, like, it's not like any of the free agent wide receivers, the big ones at least, ended up going and being great for those teams. So that's why he swung on Chase Claypool, missed badly. But that's the approach, right? It's like, okay, let me go get the trade guys because the really good players won't hit free agency. Now, maybe Chase Claypool would have hit free agency, and we all would have known why with hindsight. But regardless, and at the time, it was worth a shot. It was a good idea, bad result. But anyway, like, that's where, when it comes to free agency, like, if I'm looking at wide receivers, we got to go farther down there. Maybe you could be very happy with, DJ Chark from the Carolina Panthers, who had played for the Lions and has had a pretty solid career. Not going to be a number one guy, but a guy I really like as an outside receiver. Or maybe Tyler Boyd from the Kansas City Chiefs, but he may end up costing a little bit more. We'll kind of see how that plays out. Not a guy that you want to be a number one, but behind DJ Moore, you can get a quality veteran and then still draft one Whether it's with the 9th overall pick or in the 3rd or 4th round, like you could still get a good receiver in the draft, pair him with a good receiver in free agency, and you're not going all in on any big name splash wide receiver that might end up busting out, and all the really good young receivers aren't going to hit free agency anyway. So like the Ryan Poles approach of don't spend all your cash on the big free agents generally is the smarter approach to free agency. The teams that spend the big contracts don't tend to build the biggest winners. Like, it's one thing if you're on the cusp of a Super Bowl contender and you just need that one free agent at that one key spot. I mean, that's why the Bills signed Von Miller, right? It's like, all right, we're really close. We just need to go all in on right now. We'll go get Von Miller. But it wasn't like it was a mass spending spree at a bunch of positions. It was trade for Stephon Diggs, but sign Von Miller and add other players. But the big free agent signing was Von Miller as the one thing you need. That's where it can work a little bit better. But if you're a team like the Denver Broncos this past season that went into free agency and ended up signing Mike McGlinchey to a huge contract and outbid the Bears, signing Zach Allen to a huge contract and outbid the Bears, and some other big names that they ended up going out and getting. The Broncos were the big spenders, and how well did that work for them this season? You know what I mean? Like they're certainly in a tricky spot right now with the Russell Wilson contract that they're trying to get out of. So like signing a bunch of big free agents doesn't work well. So if Poles can find maybe one big one like a Tremaine Edmonds, he'll go there. But otherwise, you're going for a second or third tier wide receiver here, and you're going for a second and third tier pass rusher there. Maybe you get a big name center. Maybe you sign Cushenberry to the big contract. Or maybe you go get a safety or something and you sign that to the bigger contract. But otherwise, Poles is going to take things easy this year, just like he did last season, even though he's got plenty of salary cap space. Because a lot of that space is going to need to go to Jalen Johnson, and you're going to have other young players to re-sign to contracts here before long. So no need to spend it all right away on all the big players to win now, because we're probably resetting the window a little bit here with a number 1 overall pick rookie quarterback. Again, we've been avoiding having the quarterback debate every day on the damn podcast because everyone's talking about his quarterbacks all the time. But certainly we'll have that conversation as it comes up and as we get like meaningful developments. Certainly we're going to hear from Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus at the NFL Scouting Combine this week. So we're going to break down all of those comments for you right here on the podcast. I'm going to be in Indianapolis as you're listening to this podcast. I'm there. And because I'm on the road, I tried to record this before I left to get home, so I wouldn't have to do it late when I get into Indianapolis. But we'll be in Indianapolis for our podcast here coming out Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, we're going to do a bunch of bonus content from the NFL Scouting Combine. So you've got Mike Renner's down there, and he's doing NFL draft stuff for us. You've got some of our NFL draft people, and then the Locked On NFL channel is going to have some extra goodies. We're going to do some extra videos. I don't know if they're going to go on the podcast feed or just on the Locked On NFL YouTube feed, but we're going to do some, beyond the daily Locked On NFL podcast, we're going to do some special quick hitters from the ground in Indianapolis from Lucas Oil Stadium and get you updates on everything going on in the NFL Scouting Combine. So check out the Locked On NFL podcast, Locked On NFL Draft. We've got the draft dudes with Joe, and I know Kyle Krabs is going to be down there as well. So we're going to have a lot of great NFL draft content coming for you live from the Indianapolis and Lucas Oil Stadium. I will be there as well. So keep on coming back for more of that. And even from Indianapolis, you can be sure I'll always make time for you to bear down.